Good day, everyone. My name is Daniella Santana, and today I'll be presenting at the Conference on Advancing Ethics, Human Rights, and Social Justice in Social Service Delivery in South Africa. My presentation is titled Bridging the Digital Divide in the South African Education System, a Social Justice Imperative. The focus of my presentation is to explore how unequal access to technology in education creates injustice and how social workers can respond ethically and professionally to promote equality and human dignity. The issue I have chosen, the digital divide in the South African education system, is primarily a social justice issue with strong ethical and human rights dimensions. It is a social justice issue because it reflects and reinforces inequality. Learners from well-resourced urban schools benefit from digital access, while those in rural and poor communities fall further behind. It is also a human rights issue because the Constitution guarantees the right to basic education, and without digital access, that right is incomplete. And finally, it is an ethical issue because failing to address it violates the values of fairness, dignity, and responsibility that guides all professional service delivery. The digital divide is not just about technology, it is about whose futures matter and who gets left behind in an increasingly digital society. To address this problem, we must understand these three concepts more deeply. Ethics in social work involves acting in ways that protect the well-being, dignity, and rights of others. It asks us to challenge practices that cause harm or deepen inequality. Human rights recognize that every learner deserves equal access to education, information, and participation in society, regardless of geography or class. Social justice means addressing structural inequalities and advocating for systems that promote fairness and inclusion. These principles work together. They remind us that promoting digital inclusion is not an act of charity, it is a professional and moral duty rooted in justice. In South Africa, technology has become another mirror reflecting social inequality. Schools in wealthier areas have computers, Wi-Fi, and digital platforms. Meanwhile, many rural or township schools still lack basic infrastructure or even electricity. The Department of Basic Education reported in 2020 that the shift to online learning during COVID-19 exposed severe inequalities between private and public schools. Learners from privileged backgrounds continued their studies online, while those without digital access fell behind for months. This reveals how digital inequality reproduces patterns of racial, spatial, and economic injustice, and why addressing it must be central to building a fairer education system. The right to basic education is protected in Section 29 of the South African Constitution, but in the digital age, education increasingly depends on access to technology. When learners cannot connect, participate, or submit their work online, this right becomes meaningless in practice. Digital exclusion is not just a barrier to learning, it limits children's rights to equality, dignity, and development. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, 1989, and UNICEF's Human Rights-Based Approach to Education, 2019, both highlight that technology access is now an essential part of educational rights. Ensuring digital access is therefore a moral, legal, and ethical responsibility shared by educators, policymakers, and social workers. The COVID-19 pandemic made the digital divide visible in ways that could no longer be ignored. When schools closed, learning moved online, but thousands of learners had no data, devices, or electricity at home. Human Rights Watch 2020 found that many South African children, especially in rural areas, were completely excluded from education for months. A 2021 Mail and Guardian report describes Eastern Cape learners walking to local libraries just to download notes from school. These stories remind us that access to technology is directly linked to a learner's right to education, and without access, education cannot be truly called equal. As a future social worker, we cannot remain silent about inequalities that harm children and families. Our role involves advocacy, collaboration, and empowerment. We can advocate for policies that prioritize digital access for all schools. We can collaborate with NGOs and government to provide devices, training, and connectivity. We can empower learners and parents through digital literacy workshops and community programs. Importantly, we must ensure that the voices of marginalized learners are represented when decisions about education and technology are made. Ethical practice means standing on the side of justice, inclusion, and equality, not convenience. The human rights-based approach provides a strong framework for addressing digital inequality. It's built on principles of participation, accountability, non-discrimination, and empowerment. Using this approach, social workers are encouraged to work with, not for, communities, helping them identify and claim their rights. This framework shifts the focus from helping the poor to challenging the systems that keep people excluded. In the context of education, the human rights-based approach means viewing digital access as a fundamental right and demanding that institutions uphold it. Through this lens, social workers become advocates for systemic, lasting change. In conclusion, bridging the digital divide is about far more than providing computers. It is about restoring equality and dignity in education. It is a social justice imperative because without digital access, the promise of equal education remains unfulfilled. It is a human rights issue because it denies learners the chance to reach their potential, and it is an ethical issue because inaction allows inequality to persist. To bridge the divide, we must combine ethical practice, human rights advocacy, and social policy reform. And as a future social worker, we must help build a South Africa where every learner, regardless of their background, can access knowledge, opportunity, and hope. Digital access is not a privilege, it is a right that defines equality in the modern world. Thank you.